What's up guys, it's Brad from Light Architect here. In this video, I'm going to be showing how you can create some creature and digital makeup effects inside of Blender. I'll be going through some basic camera tracking and object tracking for your character in your live action shot, and then showing how you can add some digital veins and thorns to the character as well. Anyways guys, let's get started. Here we are inside of Blender. As usual, we will just delete everything in our scene. And the first thing we're going to do is import our footage and track our camera. So I'll just go to our plus tab here and go to visual effects and then motion tracking. And then we'll go to our open button here and find our footage. And I'll go ahead and select it here and click on open clip. And you can use a image sequence if you want. However, as I mentioned before, I've never had any problems using some basic MP4 files. All right, so this is our shot. We're going to be adding some CG makeup to our character here. And the first thing I'm going to do is prefetch all of our keyframes with this button here, so Blender doesn't buffer as much as we're playing back our scene. So we'll click that there. And then I'll also click on the set scene frames button so that Blender sets up our animation timeline to match the timeline of our live action shot here. And it is a little bit long here. As you can see, it's 729 frames, which is a little bit longer than I want to create the shot for. So I'm just going to do, say, the first 200 frames of our live action shot here. So I'll change this to 200. And now we have about 8 seconds of footage to add our digital effects to. So now we're going to track our camera first. So as you can see, if I play through our shot, our camera doesn't really move that much in 3D space. So what we're going to do is, instead of using a 3D camera track, we're going to use the tripod camera track. So we won't need as many tracking points in this specific example. But if you want to know how to 3D track a more advanced shot that has a lot more parallax in your scene, I have a tutorial on that as well. So I'll put a link to that in the description below. But let's go ahead and add a few tracking points to our shot here. So I'll go to the beginning of our timeline here, and then I'll go to our tracking settings. I want to change the tracking settings to blurry footage so that our pattern size is a little bit bigger, and I might actually increase this a little more as well. Then I'm just going to control and click on a point here in our background, just finding points of contrast in our scene. So I'll track through our timeline with this point, and as you can see, this tracker is holding fairly well here. And I'll go back to the beginning of our timeline and we'll add a few more tracking markers, maybe the corner of the window here, track this one, and then we'll track another point here. We'll track this one backwards, and maybe one more in the corner of this piece right here, track this one forwards. Since we're going to be doing a tripod track, this should be enough. Got 4 good tracks there, pretty clean. And you can look on your graph here to make sure your trackers are not, spiking off the graph here, to make sure they're holding pretty well. And also, of course, you can just evaluate them by eye here and make sure they're not slipping off of their points of contrast. So this should be pretty good, but feel free to add more if you want a little bit more accurate track. Now I'm going to go to the solve panel here. And like I mentioned, we'll select the tripod option here. And I want to refine the focal length, the optical center, and the radial distortion of our camera here. So I'll select all of those. And finally, I'm just going to click on solve camera motion, and Blender will solve our camera movement for our 3D scene. And as you can see here, I have a solve error of 0.82 pixels, which is under 1 pixel. So I'm going to say that's pretty good for our scene. If it's over 2 pixels, I recommend you do it again, but it kind of just depends on the output and the format of your final shot. Generally, you just want this number as low as possible, and 0.82 pixels should be just fine. All right, so now I'll go to our top right window here, and I'll just add a camera to our scene really quick. So now we have a camera to attach our tracking data to. And now I'll go to our scene setup tab here and click on set as background. And as you can see here, if I go to viewpoint camera, you can see that we actually have our footage in our background here, which is very helpful when we're lining up the geometry of the CG elements that we're going to add to our scene. And I'll also add an origin for the center of our camera here. So I'll go here to orientation, and I'll select one of our tracking points here, and then I'll click on set origin. And now, as you can see here, we have a little bit better camera view in our scene, and our camera is kind of generally pointing toward our X and Y axis in the scene. So it just helps us align our geometry a bit better. But of course, you can change this later as well. And finally, I'll just click on set up tracking scene here at the bottom. And Blender is going to add 2 different collections to our scene, as well as 2 different view layers, which we'll deal with later, as well as some compositing nodes in our compositing tab. We won't necessarily use all of them, but clicking on the setup tracking scene just streamlines a lot of the process for us, and then we can adjust some of those settings later. All right, so as you can see here, if I go back to layout mode and go to viewpoint camera, you can see that our camera in Blender is moving as if it were the camera in our live action shot, and we can go to wireframe here and see it moving with our live action shot in the background. And it's not totally accurate because we clicked the tripod setting and our live action camera wasn't on a tripod, but since we're just going to be reconstructing the face of our character here and not the actual environment and window in the background, it should work pretty well. So now what we're going to do, now that we've set up our camera, is we're going to create an object track for our character's face here. So I'll just kind of reposition our camera first, so it's just a little easier to work with. Just put it off to the side here. Something like that should be pretty good. And now we'll go back to our motion tracking tab here, and I want to go to our track tab here, and under objects I want to add a new tracking object. We'll make sure it's selected here instead of our camera. And now we're going to add some tracking markers on our character's face here so that we can attach the CG geometry to it in the computer. So I'll go back to our track tab here, and I want to use the motion model affine, which tracks the features a little bit more specifically and is very accurate for changes in textures and things like this. So I'll just go ahead and select a few tracking points for our character's face here. So I'll press Control click. So we'll just kind of adjust our tracking markers here. Something like this. And start adding our tracking markers at different points of contrast in our scene. And I'll fast forward through this bit, but pretty much as I mentioned is you're just looking for points of contrast. And for this object track, you're going to want at least 8 tracks on her face at various depths in the scene. So just keep that in mind, and I'm going to fast forward all of my tracking process here. Alright, so as you can see, I have about 10 tracking markers on our character's face here. So now we'll solve our object track. First, I'll go ahead and just kind of scroll through our scene and make sure our markers are doing what we need them to. We have one of our tracking markers when she blinks here. That's a little bit of an issue because even though it's technically staying on its point of contrast, we don't want to track that part of her face. So I'm just going to clear the keyframes after she blinks here. And now as you can see here, that point on the graph disappears, which is good. And then I might just go a little further in our shot and add another track point where her eye would be and track this one further. So now we have some pretty good reference. All right, so now let's solve our track. I'll select all of our tracking data for our character here, and I'll go to solve, and we're going to deselect the tripod option since we're doing a 3D object track. And then I'm going to select the keyframe checkbox here, so Blender will automatically choose the keyframes with the most parallax. And now I'm going to click on solve object motion. Alright, so Blender is giving us a pretty high solve error, and it's saying that some data has failed to reconstruct. So what I'm going to do is actually delete our tracking marker on our character's eye here, because I think that one's giving us a little bit of an issue since she does move her eye a bit. And I'm going to select the rest of the points and try our track again. So I'll just solve the object motion here. And now as you can see here, we have a solve error of 1.01 pixels, which is pretty solid for our scene. And there's one more thing we want to do before going into layout mode and reconstructing the geometry of our character's face. What we want to do is we want to select 2 of our object tracking points here. So I'll select this one and this one by her chin here. And I want to go to our object settings here on the left side, and I want to tell Blender the distance between these 2 points so it can more accurately represent the object track in the scene. So this is about maybe 1/4 of a meter, maybe a little bit less. So this distance should be in meters, so maybe 0.2. And then I'll click on set scale. And as you can see here, if you're watching the top left, our object track became much closer to the camera, and it should be a more accurate representation of where our object is in our scene. All right, so now that we have set our scale for the object track, let's go back to layout mode here. And I want to go ahead and save my project so we don't lose anything. So I'll just save it here. All right, and we'll save it just so in case Blender crashes or something, we don't have to start all over. And as you can see here, if we play through our footage, our object track is looking pretty good and is stuck on our character's face here, which is exactly what we want. And now it's time to reconstruct the geometry of our character's face here. So what we're going to do, instead of starting from scratch on that, is we're actually going to import a preset 3D model of a face into our scene, and then we're going to use proportional editing mode to make sure that it matches our character's face a little bit better. So I just have a blend file with a very basic 3D model of a head, and I'll put a link to that in the description. It's a free download, so if you want to use that specific model, you can download it there on, I think it's on BlendSwap. But you can use any 3D model of a head of your choice. Obviously, the better the proportions match the live action character in your shot, the better it's going to be. But let's just go to File and append our 3D head model. And I'll just click on append here. And as you can see here, our head model has been appended into the scene. And I'll go ahead and delete our cube here that has been added by default since we don't really need it. And I'll also delete our ground plane since it's just making our shot messy at this point. And what we want to do is just kind of move our head into where our object track is over here. So I'm actually going to split our window really quick and go to camera view on this right side. And as you guys probably know, if you watch this channel, this is how I like to work a lot of the time. So we can kind of work in the general 3D view on this side, and then we can see what our camera is looking at on the right side here. But anyways, I'll just drag this over and place it near the object track of our scene and just rotate it here. All right. And we just kind of want to get it generally where our trackers are. We're going to dial it in here in a second. And we know that these 3D tracking markers are on our character's skin, so we can use it to, match where our mesh should be. So now we want to attach the object tracking data to our 3D head mesh here. So while it is selected, we'll go to our object constraint properties tab here, and we'll go to add an object constraint and then click on object solver, and we'll select the object track that we have created, and then I'll go to camera and select our 3D camera, and it'll disappear here for a second, but that's just because we need to set the inverse, so it'll come right back. And now, as you can see here, if I just play through our shot, our 3D head mesh is generally tracked onto where her face should be in the live action shot, which is exactly what we want. All right, so now that we have attached the object tracking data to our 3D head mesh, let's position our 3D head a little bit more precisely in our scene here. So now we want to just align it up here in object mode. It's getting there now, as you can see on the left side. So now what we can do to get it even more accurate, we can go into edit mode, and we can switch to proportional editing mode by clicking on this button right here. And now we can use the scroll button to select more or less vertices to drag around. So this is a really nice way you can get a very organic looking sculpt without actually sculpting. It's just proportional editing mode. We'll just kind of line up our shot as best we can. And I'm going to go ahead and fast forward through this portion, but pretty much what you want to do is just use this proportional editing mode, drag your vertices around until they match your live action character as best you can. Alright, so this should be pretty decent for our shot. It's not totally accurate and it looks a little distorted, but it generally matches the shape of her face here, at least in profile mode. And, we're going to be adding some blur and different things to composite everything together. Of course, the more accurate, the better, but, depending on the amount of time you want to spend on it and the elements you're trying to add to your scene, you may need to adjust it to be more accurate or not. But this should be pretty good. I might go to object mode here and make sure that it is shaded smoothly here. And now what we're going to do is duplicate our base mesh 3 different times for the 3 elements that we're going to add. And the 3 elements we're going to add are first the CG veins makeup layer, then we're going to add the thorns kind of creature effect layer, and then finally we're going to add a shadow catcher below everything so that we can composite those CG thorns on top of everything a bit better in the compositor. So I'll just go ahead and select our base mesh here. I'll press Shift D and duplicate it once. Then I'll press Shift D and duplicate it twice. And now, as you can see here, we have 3 different base meshes that all have the same properties. And now we're going to add our CG veins on top of our first base mesh here. So I'll go ahead and turn off our camera and our viewport options for the second 2 base meshes here. And I'll relabel this first base mesh. We'll call it 3D veins face. And now what we're going to do is go kind of close this window here. And now what we're going to do is we're going to actually texture paint some CG veins on top of this face here. So first I'm going to go to our material tab here. I'll add a new material, and now I'll go to texture paint mode, and we're going to add a new texture, and we'll make it a base color. As far as width of the texture goes, I want to make this probably 3000 by 3000. Just so there's a little bit more detail, since it's kind of a close-up shot of her face. Yeah, this should be pretty good. I'll click on OK. And now I'll go to our texture properties tab here. And this is where we can add some texture brushes to paint on our veins. And I'll click on new. And I want to use an image texture. And we're actually going to be using this damaged decal texture with an alpha channel on it. And all it is just a concrete texture that I've downloaded from textures.com. And this white here is an alpha channel, so that we can paint over this texture on top of our character and use this concrete as a kind of a vein effect. But you can use any texture that you want, or you can hand paint your veins, but it's really nice to just use an alpha texture as a painted stencil in your scene. So that's what we're going to do here. So I'll go to our image settings in our texture brush panel here, and I'll open a new image, and I'll go to our decals damaged floors textures that I've just shown you, and I'll click on open. And now, as you can see here, this is the texture we're going to be painting with our brush. To paint with your brush as a stencil, we'll go back to our active tool tab here and scroll down here to texture, and instead of mapping, we'll go to stencil. And as you can see here, if I scroll my mouse over to our viewport panel here, you can see our stencil here. And to drag it around, you can middle click and just kind of drag it where you want. And I think you can press shift and click to scale it by moving your mouse. And I think to rotate it, you can press control click to rotate. And yeah, it takes a little while to get used to, but that's the gist of it. But yeah, now we're just going to paint over our character here. So I'll scale it down a bit. It's kind of tricky here. I'm not used to texture painting, but bear with me here. And I'll go here to her face. Something like this should probably be pretty good. And we'll just start painting. Missing UVs. All right, so we forgot to unwrap our character here. That's no problem. We can go to object mode really quick, and actually go to edit mode really quick, and we will select everything in wireframe mode, press U, and we'll just do a smart UV projection. Okay, and now as you can see here on our left side, we have our UVs show up, and now we'll go back to texture paint mode. So now this should work better. Go here, and now as you can see here, we can start painting these veins on top of our character here. Pretty nice looking result already. With a little bit of compositing, should be even cooler. So it just kind of depends on how many veins you want, but again, I'm going to fast forward this portion of our tutorial as I paint some veins onto her face here. So just kind of have an artistic touch of your own here, but this is the general concept. Alright, so this should be pretty good for our scene. Feel free to play around with different texture brushes according to your own stylistic taste, but this should be pretty good for the sake of the tutorial. I'll go back to our texture and switch this back to plain, and now let's go ahead and save our texture. So I'll scroll back up here and click on save all images, and now we have a base color for our shot here. And you can also go to material preview mode and see what we're getting. Just kind of this concrete texture painted on her face, and with a little bit of compositing, it will look like veins under her skin. So I'll go back to object mode here, and now what we want to do is we'll go back to layout mode, and before we add our CG thorns to the scene, we want to make sure that these veins are rendered with an alpha channel wherever they aren't being painted. So I'll actually go to shading mode with our head mesh selected, and what we want to do, I'll go to rendered view here, and I want to just add a transparent shader. So I'll press Shift A. First I'll add a mix shader here, and I'll connect this to our output, this to our input. I'll duplicate our material base color of our stencil texture that we've created. So I'll press Shift D, duplicate that, and we're going to use that as a factor here. Then I want to press Shift A. We'll add a transparent shader and add this to our top node for our mix shader. And it's a little hard to see here since our background is the same color as our character here. So I'll go ahead and under our world settings, I'll add a basic HDRI that's similar to our live action shot. So I'll just use our HDR here, just a very basic HDR, and open that. And while we're here, I'll also go to our render properties tab, and under film, I'll switch this to transparent. And now we can see where our alpha channel will be. And we want to use this base color input of our painted veins to tell Blender where our alpha channel will be. So to do that, I'm going to press Shift A, and under converter, I'm going to add a color ramp node. And now I'm just going to kind of clamp this down here. So a few things here. First of all, we need to switch our render engine to cycles. So I'll go to our render properties tab here and switch this to cycles so that we can render out an alpha channel. Then I also want to switch our transparent node to our bottom layer here, and then we can adjust our color ramp here so that the white points of our texture are being an alpha channel. And now, as you can see here, our veins are showing up by themselves, which is exactly what we want. So I hope that wasn't too hard to follow. Pretty much we have our veins material going into a color ramp, adjusting the white point of the color ramp as an input for our mix shader, which is combining a transparent shader with, again, our original veins texture here, and then finally going into a final output. And yeah, make sure you are switched to the cycles rendering engine. All right, so making some pretty good progress here. Now I'll go back to our layout mode, and I want to view through our camera really quick and see what we're getting so far. And yeah, it's coming along nicely here with a little bit of lighting and compositing. These veins will look pretty good. So now we're going to add our thorns on top of our second face base mesh here. So I'm going to disable our viewport display for our veins face layer here, and we're going to enable our second base mesh, and we'll call this thorns face. And now what we're going to do is we're going to create a thorn that we can distribute all over our character's face with a particle system. So before we create the particle system, we'll create that very basic thorn. So I'll just press Shift A. I'll add a plane to our scene. We'll just kind of place this off to the side of our camera so we can adjust it. And I just want to make sure the origin of our plane is at a slight angle here. I'll just rotate this up so we can see what we're working with. And now I'll go into edit mode. I'll scale this down a bit, extrude it a bit maybe, scale this part down, and now we have a super basic thorn. Something like that is not bad. Make it like a spike kind of. All right, something like this is pretty good. I'm gonna go with it for now. You can duplicate this and create different variations of it and create them as a collection, and then instance that collection on top of the particle system instead of just one object if you want a little bit more variation. But this should be pretty good. Now we'll add a quick material to this. I'll go to our material tab and add a new material. For our base color, just going to use an image texture. And I have this image of some rhino skin, which is a pretty disturbing looking thorn, so we'll use that. This is the preview here, as you can see. Just kind of a cracked skin looking effect here. And if I go to rendered view, this is what I'm getting. And as you can see, we have some stretch UVs. So to solve that, I'll just go to edit mode. I'll select all of our vertices, press U, and then smart UV project, okay. And now as you can see here, you know, not perfect, but should work just fine since it's going to be so small in the scene. And yeah, this should be pretty good. Make sure that the origin of your thorn is at the base of it here so that it will instance correctly. And yeah, we'll relabel it. We'll call it thorn. And now it's time to instance this thorn all over our face mesh. So I'll select our face mesh here, and now we're going to go to our particle properties tab here. We'll add a new particle system. We'll change it to a hair particle system, and we'll select advanced. And as you can see here, this is pretty crazy. So we want to bring down the hair length to, we'll try just 1 maybe. Actually, we'll try 0.2. Try 0.1 maybe. And segments at just 2 segments. And I'll actually do 0.03. That's better. All right, so now we'll enable our rotation option here, and we'll go to render, and instead of rendering it as a path, we want to render this as an object, and then we'll instance the thorn all over her face here, which as you can see is, you know, already looking pretty cool here, but we do want it a little bit bigger obviously. So I'll go to our render scale settings here, and I'll boost the scale to 0.2, and yeah, now we have some thorns instance all over our mesh here. And I also want to increase the scale randomness for a little bit of variation, which is, you know, looking pretty solid. And I might increase the scale a little bit more, maybe 0.26. This should be pretty good. All right, so now that we have kind of a general thorn system all over our mesh here, now what we're going to do is we're going to actually texture paint more specifically where we want these thorns to show up. So while our head mesh here is selected, I'll go to our weight painting mode here, and then I'll go here to vertex groups and add a vertex group, and we can call it thorns density. And now what we can do is we can actually weight paint where we want these thorns to be. So I might just want it kind of by her face here, maybe some on her nose. You know, be as specific or general with it as you want. Be creative with it. That should be pretty good. And we'll go back to our object mode. Then we'll go back to our particle properties tab. We'll scroll here to vertex groups. And now under density, I'll select our thorns density vertex group. And as you can see here, our thorns are only showing up where we wanted them to based on our weight painting data. All right, so this is looking pretty awesome. If I go to rendered view, you can kind of see what we're getting so far. And there are a few more things we can do here to get it looking much better, but we're pretty close. So I'll just go here to our camera view. And this is what we're getting so far. One thing we want to do is actually give our particles some variation. So what I'm going to do is under rotation, I want to change the phase here. So there's a little bit of variation, and we want to randomize the phase. So now we have a little bit more randomness in our thorns here, which is kind of nice. And another really cool thing we can do here, in addition to just playing around with a lot of these particle settings, is we can actually, first we can increase the number of particles perhaps to maybe 3,000. Now we're getting a lot more particles, which is kind of nice. Might do 3,500. And now a really cool thing we can do is actually go to particle edit mode, and we can use the comb tool here to kind of sculpt how these thorn particles are instanced in our scene. So we can just kind of comb it to give it a little bit more organic result. Again, be as precise or imprecise as you want here. But yeah, this is kind of a cool way to give everything some variation. Another thing you can do is you can go to the cut mode here in the particle editing tab. And I know I don't want any particles coming out of her eye here, so I'm just going to use the cut particle tool and erase all of these particles. And now as you can see here, if I go to object mode, we only have these effects not where the eye is itself. And also we have our character's hair here in the foreground, so unless we want to create a mask for this hair, we probably want to remove some of these particles here as well. But you might be able to get away with it. But yeah, feel free to play around with different styles and everything. I'm pretty happy with this for the sake of this tutorial, but you may want to do some tweaking yourself. All right, so now what we're going to do is we are going to set up our scene to be rendered and create some view layers for our different elements and add some lights to match our 3D scene to our live action. So we'll start off with adding some lights to our scene, and I want to try to replicate this window light coming from the right side of our scene here. As you can see, our character is being lit from the left side of her face, kind of a light coming toward camera. So we want to try to match that in our CG elements. So I'll press Shift A and we'll add a area light here. And I just want to add this to the far side of her face, something like this possibly. Kind of rotate it a little bit when I try to match the size of that window. And then I'll increase the power to maybe 100 and go back to our camera view, and I'll go to rendered view just to see what we're getting so far. And everything is a little bit bright. I'll go to our world properties tab here and deselect ambient occlusion. And I also want to bring down our HDRI strength to maybe 0.6. So now our area light is playing a little bit more in our scene. And I actually want to select our thorns head mesh here, and under its particle settings, I'm going to turn off the show emitter option. And also for viewport display, we'll deselect the show emitter option as well. And now as you can see here, we just have our thorns showing up on this layer, and we can kind of see what's happening. Alright, so it's looking a little bit bright here, but this is a pretty good start. Now we're going to separate our elements into different view layers so that we can composite everything more effectively. So I'll relabel this foreground view layer to, we'll call this one Thorns. And the only thing we want to show up on this view layer is our thorns face. So what we want to do is we want to press M while our thorns face is selected. We'll add it to a new collection called Thorns Face. And now it's in a new collection. And I'm going to go ahead and delete our background collection here. And I'll delete our light as well. The light that was automatically added, not our area light. Let's see here, I'll add our thorn to this thorn's face layer. And then I want to add these other two head meshes with their various effects on them to their own collection as well. So I'll turn them back on here for the time being. And I'll select our 3D veins face layer. I'll press M, I'll add it to a new collection. We'll call it 3D veins face. Okay, and I'll select our third base mesh here, and this is going to be our shadow catcher. So I'll just call this shadow catcher. And we want to press M with that one selected, add it to a new collection, and call this one shadow catcher. All right. So now we have our 3 different elements that we're going to add in their own separate collections. And if we go to our filter options here, we can turn on all of our restriction toggles so that we can adjust our view layer more effectively. And as I mentioned, for this specific view layer, we only want our thorns to show up. So what we'll do here is we'll leave this one on, but then for the 3D veins face layer, we'll turn on indirect. And for our shadow catcher, we'll turn on indirect as well. And as you can see here, if I go to rendered view now, only our thorns show up in this view layer. But if I turn off indirect only, as you can see, our veins will show up. And then if I turn off our indirect only for our shadow catcher will show up. One thing we do want to do, however, for our shadow catcher element, since it's going to indirectly affect the lighting of our thorns here, is we want to actually make it the general color of our character's skin in the live action shot. So I'll go ahead and select our shadow catcher layer really quick, and I'll go to our material tab, add a new material. And for our base color, I just want to use the eyedropper tool to select a portion of her skin here. And now it's much darker, which is going to indirectly affect the lighting on our thorns here. All right, so this should be pretty solid. Now I'll go back to indirect mode. And actually, instead of indirect, we want to use this shadow catcher as a holdout layer for our thorns. So we actually want to select the holdout option and not indirect. And that's going to help hide the seams of our thorns coming out of our character's skin here. I want to delete our foreground collection here just so we have our 3 different collections and we can control them all more effectively. And I'm actually going to adjust our CG thorn really quick here. So I'll grab it off on the side. And since our origin point is kind of low here, you can kind of see the seams of our thorns as they come out of the skin. So what I might do is go to edit mode really quick with our thorn selected and bring our thorn down on the Z-axis. So as you can see here, they'll come out of the skin a bit more effectively. They're just kind of a little bit more embedded in the skin. All right, so this should be pretty solid. Now let's set up our next view layer. First, I'll go to our background view layer, and I actually want to delete this one. And now I will add a new view layer, and we'll call this one veins. And now we'll select our indirect only option on our thorns face collection as well as our shadow catcher. And as you can see here, if I go to rendered mode here, now we only see the veins on this view layer, which is exactly what we want. All right, so finally we'll add one more view layer here. So we'll select add view layer and we'll call this one shadow catcher. And for this view layer, we want just our shadow catcher head mesh, but we want to have our thorns and 3D face collections affect this indirectly. So we'll select the indirect only option on each of these. And then for our shadow catcher, we want to go here to object properties. Then under visibility, we'll make this a shadow catcher. And as you can see here, if I go to rendered view, you'll notice that all we have here is the shadow pass of our thorns and veins. All right, so we are almost ready for a test render and composite. One more thing I want to do is actually add a little bit of depth of field to the camera in our scene so that these effects are integrated into the live action shot a bit better. Our live action shot is pretty shallow focus, so even the hair of our character close to the camera is kind of out of focus in comparison to her eyes and nose here. So we want to actually simulate that shallow focus effect in our 3D camera as well. So I'll go back to our thorns view layer here, and I'll just go to rendered view, and I'll select our camera here, and under our camera tab, I'll scroll down here and select the depth of field option. And we want our focus object to probably be our thorns face here. Or you know what we can do is actually just add an empty for our focus. So I'll press Shift A, we'll add a sphere for our empty, and we'll just place this by our 3D character's nose here. So our camera can focus on her nose, and I'll relabel the empty focus empty. Now I'll go back to our camera view, select our camera, and under depth of field, we'll focus on the focus empty, and we'll go back to rendered view. And for the f-stop, I want to bring this down until our focus is a little bit off for our foreground thorns here. We'll try 1.4, not bad, maybe even 1. Now as you can see here, it's blurring quite a bit, which might be a little bit too much. Maybe I'll try something like 1.2. And yeah, this should be pretty solid. Now I'll go back to solid mode here. And I think our thorns are a little bit too bright in the scene. scene. We can fix that in compositing, but I also might just bring down the brightness of our material here. So under our shading tab with our thorn selected, I'll just kind of adjust it a bit here. I'll go to our material. I'll just add a quick little RGB curves option here, bring it down a bit so it's not quite as bright. And then I also might go and add a bump map to this thorn. So I'll press Shift A and we'll add a vector bump map, and we'll take the color input from our texture into the distance, and then our normal into our normal input for our shader. I think it needs to be maybe in the height actually. Yeah, so our color needs to go to our height, and then we can change the strength with this setting right here. So maybe 0.2, just to give it a little bit of bump. All right, so go back to layout mode, go to our viewpoint camera, see how it's looking now. All right, looking much better, much darker. So now it's time to do a little test render and composite everything together a bit. So I'll go back to solid view here. Now I'll go to our render properties tab. We'll change the render samples to maybe, for our test renders, we'll try something like 20 samples. And I'll enable adaptive sampling. Under advanced, I'll select the seed stopwatch for some noise variation. And I'll go to our output tab here, and I'll change the file format to OpenEXR, and I'll choose a file output, and I'll just call this infected composite. And accept. And now I'll go here to render and render image, and we'll wait for Blender to render out this test image and composite all of our different view layers on top of each other. Alright guys, so right off the bat you might see a composite, something like this, but that's just because we haven't used the compositing nodes inside of Blender to layer all of our different passes together. So let's go ahead and close our render here and go to our compositing tab and start compositing everything together. So this is where a lot of the magic happens. As you can see here right now, Blender has automatically set up some nodes for us. We have our original live action shot here going into an alpha over node where our thorns view layer has been overlaid on top of it. And then our second alpha over node, for whatever reason, has another thorns layer overlaid on top of it. This is not what we want, so I'm going to go ahead and delete this alpha over node really quick, and we'll delete this render layer as well, and we'll start from scratch. I'll move our final output to our composite here and view node, and let's start compositing these different layers together and see what we get. First thing I'm going to do is overlay our veins on top of our shot. So instead of using our thorns layer as the first view layer that we overlay on top of our live action shot, I'm going to actually switch this to veins. And as you can see here, our veins will be overlaid here. And one thing we might do is actually create a mask and mask out the part of the veins that will be covered by her hair here. But first we're going to try to darken them a bit and blend them into the skin a bit more. So what we can do here is just press Shift A. I'll add a color RGB curves node here, and I'll just bring this down a bit so it's much darker, which is already looking much better. And you know, we might not even need to blend in this area here if we adjust our factor correctly, but again, it kind of depends on your taste. I want to get these veins to be pretty dark in our scene actually, and then adjust the factor to make them look like they're a little bit more below the skin. So maybe I'll bring down the factor here. Something like this is not looking too bad. You know, we're going to overlay our thorns and shadow paths on top of this too, so we might not have anything to worry about here. I want to blur the veins a little bit just to match it to the blur of our live action shot a bit. So I'll press Shift A, add a filter, basic blur node, and I'll maybe turn this to a bokeh blur and then blur it by 1 pixel on the X and the Y axis. So this is not looking too bad. I'm pretty happy with this. Once we overlay some other effects on top of it, it'll blend together nicely. So now we'll composite our shadow paths of our thorns on top of this veins layer. So I'll select our alpha over node, I'll press Shift D to duplicate it, and we'll connect it to our final output composite as well. And then I want to duplicate our render layers node here for our veins and put it over here before our second alpha over node that we've created. And then I want to take this image and put it into the bottom input of this alpha over node, and then we want to switch this to shadow catcher. And now as you can see here, we have a shadow catcher for our thorns on top of our footage here, which is what we want. I want to add the same blur effect to this shadow as well to blend it into the shot a bit more. So I'll press Shift D with our blur effect enabled and put this right after our shadow catcher. And I might also boost up this factor node all the way to 1 so the shadows are a bit darker. And now I'm seeing some sampling of our shadow here, so I might increase the blur a bit to hide that. But of course we can also increase our render samples to get rid of that as well. But this is coming along nicely. Now finally, let's add our thorns layer on top of everything. So once again, I will duplicate our alpha over node. I'll press Shift D, add this to our view node, and then connect it to our composite. And then I'll duplicate our render layers here. I'll press Shift D and connect our image output to our alpha over input. And then I'll switch the view layer to thorns. And now we have some thorns overlaid on top of everything, which is looking pretty nice. However, they're a bit too bright. We might be able to adjust some of the environmental lighting and our area light in the 3D scene itself. However, I do think we can probably just bring it down in the compositing process. So let's go ahead and try it out really quick. So I'll just go ahead and press Shift A. I'll add a color RGB curves node and bring it down a bit to darken these thorns. And that's a little bit too much, obviously. Let's see here. Something like that is not too bad. Kind of play around with it here. And I'm going to add a blur node to our thorns here as well. So I'll press Shift A. We'll add a blur node here, make it a bokeh blur, and we'll boost up the X and Y blur properties here. And yeah, that's looking pretty good. Can zoom in here, make sure that things are matching fairly well. And at this point, it's just a matter of adjusting your different passes to kind of match your final shot here. I think one of the main things that could make the shot better would be to adjust the particle system variation of our thorns here. But this is looking all right. I might press Shift A, add a color balance node here, and we might color correct our thorns here a bit. We might make these a little bit warmer so it's a little bit closer to the color of our character's skin. So this is not looking too bad here. I want to try to adjust our thorns particle system to try to blend it into our shot a bit. So I'll go back to layout mode really quick. And one thing I might do is just kind of adjust some of the thorns that aren't looking too good in our composite. So as you can see, you know, some of the thorns down here are not really integrated into the geometry of our shot as well as they should be. So I might just go to particle edit mode and kind of cut them off here. Some of the ones on her nose aren't properly integrated either, so I'll just start deleting some of these ones that I don't like. Yeah, some of these ones right here are kind of overlaid with her hair, but you know, this is kind of just a matter of personal taste here. You can also, you know, comb these a bit, give it some variation. And I might go to our thorn itself here. You could scale it up or scale it down depending on what you want from it. Or if you want it to be a little more realistic, we could actually give it another dimension here. So maybe extrude it along one of the axes here. So it's not just kind of a 2D element. And what we can do is we can select our entire thorn here, reproject it here. But yeah, this is the general concepts behind it. We could actually adjust our thorn here a bit and maybe duplicate it, give it a little bit of different variation on the second one, maybe scale it down a bit so it's not quite as large here. And then we could actually group these into their own collection. We'll select them both, add them to a new collection. We'll call it thorns. And then we'll select our thorns face again, and under the particle settings I'll render it as a collection, and then we can instance the thorns collection. And now, as you can see here, we'll have even more variation because we have two different thorns being instanced on this same collection. But we'll go ahead and do one more quick test render here and see what we get for our final result. So I'll go back to our render tab here. I'll increase the render samples to 40 just so we get rid of some of that noise. And once again, I'll go to render and render image, and let's see what we get. All right, guys, so this is our second test render, and I think it's looking quite a bit better. I'm a little bit more happy with where the thorns are placed in our scene. However, they're looking a little bit too green here, so I'll just adjust a few of the compositing node settings. I'll go back to the compositor here and you know, play around with some of these settings here to see what we can get to look different. That's looking a little bit better. Might cool it down a bit as well. But at this point, it's just a matter of using your you know, compositing settings to make sure you get a result that you like. You know, lots of different curves adjustments you can do here. And yeah, I'm pretty happy with this final result. You might want to add a little bit of final color correction here with a color balance node. If I'm not mistaken, I think I made mine a little bit green. But anyways, this is the general idea. I'm going to end the tutorial here because I think it's getting a little bit long, but I hope this video was helpful. As always, feel free to leave a comment if you have any questions or suggestions in the comment section below. Let me know what kind of videos or tutorials you'd like to see next, and I'll see you next time.